Book 2, Chapter 6, Part 1 of A Voyage towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1 by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 6. Route of the ship from New Zealand in search of a continent, with an account of the various obstructions met with from the ice, and the methods pursued to explore the southern Pacific Ocean. 1773 November. At 8 o'clock in the evening of the 26th, we took our departure from Cape Palliser, and steered to the south, inclining to the east, having a favourable gale from the northwest and southwest. We daily saw some rockweeds, seals, Port Egmont hens, albatrosses, pintadoes, and other petrels. 1773 December. And on the 2nd of December, being in the latitude of 48 degrees 23 minutes south, longitude 179 degrees 16 minutes west, we saw a number of red-billed penguins, which remained about us for several days. On the 5th, being in the latitude 50 degrees 17 minutes south, longitude 179 degrees 40 minutes east, the variation was 18 degrees 25 minutes east. At half an hour past 8 o'clock the next evening, we reckoned ourselves antipodes to our friends in London, consequently as far removed from them as possible. On the 8th, being in the latitude 55 degrees 39 minutes, longitude 178 degrees 53 minutes west, we ceased to see penguins and seals, and concluded that those we had seen retired to the southern parts of New Zealand whenever it was necessary for them to be at land. We had now a strong gale at northwest and a great swell from southwest. This swell we got as soon as the south point of New Zealand came in that direction, and as we had had no wind from that quarter the 6 preceding days, but on the contrary it had been at east, north, and northwest, I conclude there can be no land to the southward, under the meridian of New Zealand, but what must lie very far to the south. The 2 following days we had very stormy weather, sleet and snow, winds between the north and southwest. The 11th the storm abated, and the weather clearing up, we found the latitude to be 61 degrees 15 minutes south, longitude 173 degrees 4 minutes west. This fine weather was of short duration. In the evening the wind increased to a strong gale at southwest, blew in squalls attended with thick snow showers, hail and sleet. The mercury in the thermometer fell to 32. Consequently the weather was very cold, and seemed to indicate that ice was not far off. At 4 o'clock the next morning, being in the latitude of 62 degrees 10 minutes south, longitude 172 degrees west, we saw the first ice island, 11½ degrees further south than the first ice we saw the preceding year, after leaving the Cape of Good Hope. At the time we saw this ice, we also saw an Antarctic petrel, some grey albatrosses, and our old companions pintadoes and blue petrels. The wind kept veering from southwest by the northwest to north-northeast, for the most part a fresh gale, attended with thick haze and snow, on which account we steered to the south-east and east, keeping the wind always on the beam, that it might be our power to return back nearly on the same track, should our course have been interrupted by any danger whatever. For some days we had a great sea from the northwest and southwest, so that it is not probable there can be any land near, between these 2 points. We fell in with several large islands on the 14th, and about noon, with a quantity of loose ice, through which we sailed, latitude 64 degrees 55 minutes south, longitude 163 degrees 20 minutes west. Grey albatrosses, blue petrels, pintadoes, and fulmars were seen. As we advanced to the south-east by east with a fresh gale at west, we found the number of ice islands increase fast upon us. Between noon and 8 in the evening we saw but 2, but before 4 o'clock in the morning of the 15th we had passed 17, besides a quantity of loose ice which we ran through. At 6 o'clock we were obliged to haul to the north-east, in order to clear an immense field that lay to the south and south-east. The ice, in most part of it, lay close packed together. In other places there appeared partitions in the field, and a clear sea beyond it. However, I did not think it safe to venture through, as the wind would not permit us to return the same way that we must go in. Besides, as it blew strong, and the weather at times was exceedingly foggy, it was the more necessary for us to get clear of this loose ice, which is rather more dangerous than the great islands. It was not such ice as is usually found in bays or rivers and near shore, but such as breaks off from the islands, and may not improperly be called parings of the large pieces, or the rubbish or fragments which fall off when the great islands break loose from the place where they are formed. We had not stood long to the north-east before we found ourselves embayed by the ice, and were obliged to tack and stretch to the south-west, having the field or loose ice to the south, and many huge islands to the north. After standing 2 hours on this tack, the wind very luckily veering to the westward, we tacked, stretched to the north, and soon got clear of the loose ice, but not before we had received several hard knocks from the larger pieces, which, with all our care, we could not avoid. After clearing one danger, we still had another to encounter. The weather remained foggy, and many large islands lay in our way, so that we had to luff for one and bear up for another. Once we were very near falling aboard of, and, if it had happened, this circumstance would never have been related. These difficulties, together with the improbability of finding land farther south, and the impossibility of exploring it, on account of the ice, if we should find any, determined me to get more to the north. At the time we last tacked, we were in the longitude of 159 degrees 20 minutes west, and in the latitude of 66 degrees 0 minutes south. Several penguins were seen on some of these islands, and a few Antarctic petrels on the wing. We continued to stand to the north, with a fresh gale at west, and tended with thick snow showers till 8 o'clock in the evening, when the wind abated, the sky began to clear up, and at 6 o'clock in the morning of the 16th it fell calm. 4 hours later it was succeeded by a breeze at north-east, with which we stretched to the south-east, having thick hazy weather, with snow showers, and all our rigging coated with ice. In the evening we attempted to take some up out of the sea, but were obliged to desist, the sea running too high, and the pieces being so large that it was dangerous for the boat to come near them. The next morning, being the 17th, we succeeded better, for falling in with a quantity of loose ice, we hoisted out 2 boats, and by noon got on board as much as we could manage. We then made sail for the east, with a gentle breeze northerly, attended with sleet and snow, which froze to the rigging as it fell. At this time we were in the latitude of 64 degrees 41 minutes south, longitude 155 degrees 44 minutes west. The ice we took up proved to be none of the best, being chiefly composed of frozen snow, on which account it was porous, and had imbibed a good deal of salt water. But this drained off after lying a while on deck, and the water then yielded was fresh. We continued to stretch to the east, with a piercing cold northerly wind, attended with a thick fog, snow and sleet, that decorated all our rigging with icicles. We were hourly meeting with some of the large ice islands, which in these high latitudes render navigation so very dangerous. At 7 in the evening, falling in with a cluster of them, we narrowly escaped running aboard of one, and with difficulty wore clear of the others. We stood back to the west till 10 o'clock, at which time the fog cleared away, and we resumed our course to the east. At noon the next day we were in the latitude of 64° 49' south, longitude 149° 19' west. Some time after, our longitude, by observed distance of the sun and moon, was 149° 19' west, by Mr Kendall's watch 148° 36', and by my reckoning 148° 43', latitude 64° 48' south. The clear weather, and the wind veering to northwest, tempted me to steer south, which course we continued till 7 in the morning of the 20th, when the wind changing to northeast and the sky becoming clouded, we hauled up southeast in the afternoon. The wind increased to a strong gale, attended with a thick fog, snow, sleet, and rain, which constitutes the very worst of weather. Our rigging at this time was so loaded with ice, that we had enough to do to get our topsails down, to double the reef. At 7 o'clock in the evening, in the longitude of 147° 46', we came, the second time, within the Antarctic or Polar Circle, continuing our course to the south-east till 6 o'clock the next morning. At that time, being in the latitude of 67° 5' south, all at once we got in among a cluster of very large ice islands, and a vast quantity of loose pieces, and as the fog was exceedingly thick, it was with the utmost difficulty we wore clear of them. This done, we stood to the northwest till noon, when, the fog being somewhat dissipated, we resumed our course again to the southeast. The ice islands we met with in the morning were very high and rugged, forming at their tops many peaks, whereas the most of them we had seen before were flat at top, and not so high, though many of them were between 200 and 300 feet in height, and between 2 and 3 miles in circuit, with perpendicular cliffs or sides, astonishing to behold. Most of our winged companions had now left us. The grey albatrosses only remained, and instead of the other birds, we were visited by a few Antarctic petrels. The 22nd we steered east-south-east, with a fresh gale at north, blowing in squalls, one of which took hold of the mizzen topsail, tore it all to rags, and rendered it for ever after useless. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the wind veering towards the west, our course was east northerly. At this time we were in the latitude of 67° 31', the highest we had yet been in, longitude 142° 54' west. We continued our course to the east by north till noon, the 23rd, when being in the latitude of 67° 12', longitude 138° 0', we steered southeast, having then 23 ice islands in sight from off the deck, and twice that number from the masthead, and yet we could not see above 2 or 3 miles round us. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, in the latitude of 67° 20', longitude 137° 12', we fell in with such a quantity of field or loose ice as covered the sea in the whole extent from south to east, and was so thick and close as wholly to obstruct our passage. At this time, the wind being pretty moderate and the sea smooth, we brought to at the outer edge of the ice, hoisted out 2 boats, and sent them to take some up. In the mean time we laid hold of several large pieces alongside, and got them on board with our tackle. The taking up ice proved such cold work, that it was 8 o'clock by the time the boats had made 2 trips, when we hoisted them in, and made sail to the west, under double reefed topsails and courses, with a strong gale at north, attended with sleet and snow, which froze to the rigging as it fell, making the ropes like wires, and the sails like boards or plates of metal. The sheaves also were frozen so fast in the block, that it required our utmost efforts to get a topsail down and up; the cold so intense as hardly to be endured; the whole sea, in a manner, covered with ice, a hard gale, and a thick fog. Under all these unfavourable circumstances, it was natural for me to think of returning more to the north, seeing no probability of finding any land here, nor a possibility of getting further south; and to have proceeded to the east in this latitude must have been wrong, not only on account of the ice, but because we must have left a vast space of sea to the north unexplored, a space of 24 degrees of latitude, in which a large tract of land might have lain. Whether such a supposition was well grounded, could only be determined by visiting those parts. While we were taking up ice, we got 2 of the Antarctic petrels so often mentioned, by which our conjectures were confirmed, of their being of the petrel tribe. They are about the size of a large pigeon. The feathers of the head, back, and part of the upper side of the wings are of a light brown; the belly and under side of the wings white; the tail feathers are also white, but tipped with brown. At the same time we got another new peterel, smaller than the former, and all of a dark grey plumage. We remarked that these birds were fuller of feathers than any we had hitherto seen. Such care has nature taken to clothe them suitably to the climate in which they live. At the same time we saw a few chocolate coloured albatrosses. These, as well as the peterels above mentioned, we nowhere saw but among the ice; hence one may with reason conjecture that there is land to the south. If not, I must ask where these birds breed; a question which perhaps will never be determined, for hitherto we have found these lands, if any, quite inaccessible. Besides these birds we saw a very large seal, which kept playing about us some time. One of our people who had been at Greenland called it a sea horse, but every one else took it for what I have said. Since our first falling in with the ice, the mercury in the thermometer had been from 33 to 31 at noonday. On the 24th the wind abated, veering to the northwest, and the sky cleared up, in the latitude of 67 degrees 0', longitude 138 degrees 15'. As we advanced to the northeast with a gentle gale at northwest, the ice islands increased so fast upon us, that this day at noon we could see near 100 round us, besides an immense number of small pieces. Perceiving that it was likely to be calm, I got the ship into as clear a berth as I could, where she drifted along with the ice, and by taking the advantage of every light air of wind, was kept from falling aboard any of these floating isles. Here it was we spent Christmas Day, much in the same manner as we did the preceding one. We were fortunate in having continual daylight and clear weather, for had it been as foggy as on some of the preceding days, nothing less than a miracle could have saved us from being dashed to pieces. In the morning of the 26th the whole sea was in a manner covered with ice, 200 large islands and upwards, being seen within the compass of 4 or 5 miles, which was the limits of our horizon, besides smaller pieces innumerable. Our latitude at noon was 66 degrees 15', longitude 134 degrees 22'. By observation we found that the ship had drifted, or gone, about 20 miles to the northeast or east-northeast, whereas by the ice islands it appeared that she had gone little or nothing, from which we concluded that the ice drifted nearly in the same direction and at the same rate. At 4 o'clock a breeze sprang up at W.S.W. and enabled us to steer north, the most probable course to extricate ourselves from these dangers. We continued our course to the north with a gentle breeze at west, attended with clear weather, till 4 o'clock the next morning, when meeting with a quantity of loose ice we brought to, and took on board as much as filled all our empty casks, and for several days' present expense. This done, we made sail and steered north-west with a gentle breeze at north-east. Clear frosty weather. Our latitude at this time was 65 degrees 53 minutes south, longitude 133 degrees 42 minutes west. Islands of ice not half so numerous as before. At 4 in the morning of the 28th, the wind having veered more to the east and south-east, increased to a fresh gale, and was attended with snow showers. Our course was north till noon the next day, being then in the latitude of 62 degrees 24 minutes, longitude 134 degrees 37 minutes. We steered northwest by north. Some hours after, the sky cleared up, and the wind abating, veered more to the south. On the 30th, had little wind westerly, dark gloomy weather, with rain and sleet at times. Several whales seen playing about the ship, but very few birds. Islands of ice in plenty, and a swell from W.N.W. On the 31st, little wind from the westward, fair and clear weather, which afforded an opportunity to air the spare sails, and to clean and smoke the ship between decks. At noon our latitude was 59 degrees 40 minutes south, longitude 135 degrees 11 minutes west. Our observation today gave us reason to conjecture that we had a southerly current. Indeed, this was no more than what might reasonably be supposed to account for such huge masses of ice being brought from the south. In the afternoon we had a few hours calm, succeeded by a breeze from the east, which enabled us to resume our northwest by north course. 1774 January. January 1st. The wind remained not long at east, but veered round by the south to the west, blew fresh, attended with snow showers. In the evening, being in the latitude of 58 degrees 39 minutes south, we passed 2 islands of ice, after which we saw no more till we stood again to the south. At 5 o'clock in the morning on the 2nd, it fell calm, being at this time in the latitude of 58 degrees 2 minutes, longitude 137 degrees 12 minutes. The calm being succeeded by a breeze at east, we steered northwest by west. My reason for steering this course was to explore part of the great space of sea between us and our track to the south. On the 3rd at noon, being in latitude 56 degrees 46 minutes, longitude 139 degrees 45 minutes, the weather became fair and the wind veered to southwest. At about this time we saw a few small divers, as we call them, of the petrel tribe, which we judged to be such as are usually seen near land, especially in the bays, and on the coast of New Zealand. I cannot tell what to think of these birds. Had there been more of them, I should have been ready enough to believe that they were, at this time, not very far from land, as I never saw one so far from known land before. Probably these few had been drawn thus far by some shoal of fish, for such were certainly about us, by the vast number of blue petrels, albatrosses, and such other birds as are usually seen in the great ocean, all or most of which left us before night. 2 or 3 pieces of seaweed were also seen, but these appeared old and decayed. At 8 o'clock in the evening, being in the latitude of 56 degrees south, longitude 140 degrees 31 minutes west, the wind fixing in the westerly board, obliged us to steer north-easterly, and laid me under the necessity of leaving unexplored a space of sea to the west, containing nearly 40 degrees of longitude, and half that of latitude. Had the wind continued favourable, I intended to have run 15 or 20 degrees of longitude more to the west in the latitude we were then in, and back again to the east in the latitude of 50 degrees. This route would have so intersected the space above mentioned, as hardly to have left room for the bare supposition of any kind of land lying there. Indeed, as it was, we have little reason to believe that there is, but rather the contrary, from the great hollow swell we had had, for several days, from the west and northwest, though the wind had blown from a contrary direction a great part of the time, which is a great sign that we had not been covered by any land between these two points. While we were in the high latitudes, many of our people were attacked with a slight fever, occasioned by colds. It happily yielded to the simplest remedies, was generally removed in a few days, and at this time we had not above 1 or 2 on the sick list. We proceeded N.E. by north till the 6th at noon, being then in the latitude of 52 degrees 0' south, longitude 135 degrees 32' west, and about 200 leagues from our track to Otaheite, in which space it was not probable, all circumstances considered, there is any extensive land, and it being still less probable any lay to the west, from the great mountainous billows we had had, and still continued to have, from that quarter. I therefore steered N.E. with a fresh gale at W.S.W. At 8 o'clock in the morning on the 7th, being in the latitude of 50 degrees 49' south, we observed several distances of the sun and moon, which gave the longitude as follows, viz. By Mr Wales, 133 degrees 24' 0" west; Gilbert, 133 degrees 10' 0". Clark, 133 degrees 0' 0". Smith, 133 degrees 37' 25". Myself, 133 degrees 37' 0". Mean, 133 degrees 21' 43". By the watch, 133 degrees 44' 0" west. My reckoning, 133 degrees 39' 0". Variation of the compass, 6 degrees 2' 0" east. Thermometer, 50 degrees. The next morning we observed again, and the results were agreeable to the preceding observations, allowing for the ship's run. I must here take notice, that our longitude can never be erroneous, while we have so good a guide as Mr Kendal's watch. This day at noon we steered east-n.e. a half east, being then in the latitude of 49 degrees 7' south, longitude 131 degrees 2' west. On the 9th, in latitude 48 degrees 17' south, longitude 127 degrees 10' west, we steered east, with a fine fresh gale at west, attended with clear present weather, and a great swell from the same direction as the wind. In the morning of the 10th, having but little wind, we put a boat in the water, in which some of the officers went and shot several birds. These afforded us a fresh meal. They were of the petrel tribe, and such as are usually seen at any distance from land. Indeed, neither birds nor any other thing was to be seen that could give us the least hopes of finding any, and therefore at noon the next day, being then in the latitude of 47 degrees 51' south, longitude 122 degrees 12' west, and a little more than 200 leagues from my track to Otaheite in 1769, I altered the course and steered south-east, with a fresh gale at S.W. by west. In the evening, when our latitude was 48 degrees 22' south, longitude 121 degrees 29 minutes west. We found the variation to be 2 degrees 34 minutes east, which is the least variation we had found without the tropic. In the evening of the next day we found it to be 4 degrees 30 minutes east. Our latitude at that time was 50 degrees 5 minutes south, longitude 119 degrees half west. Our course was now more southerly, till the evening of the 13th, when we were in the latitude of 53 degrees 0 minutes south, longitude 118 degrees 3 minutes west. The wind being then at northwest, a strong gale with a thick fog and rain, which made it unsafe to steer large, I hauled up southwest and continued this course till noon the next day, when our latitude was 56 degrees 4 minutes south, longitude 122 degrees 1 minute west. The wind having veered to the north and the fog continuing, I hauled to the east under courses and close reefed topsails. But this sail we could not carry long, for before 8 o'clock in the evening the wind increased to a perfect storm, and obliged us to lie to, under the mizzen staysail, till the morning of the 16th, when the wind having a good deal abated and veered to west, we set the courses, reefed topsails, and stood to the south. Soon after the weather cleared up, and in the evening we found the latitude to be 56 degrees 48 minutes south, longitude 119 degrees 8 minutes west. We continued to steer to the south, inclining to the east till the 18th, when we stood to the southwest with the wind at southeast, being at this time in the latitude of 61 degrees 9 minutes south, longitude 116 degrees 7 minutes west. At 10 o'clock in the evening it fell calm, which continued till 2 the next morning, when a breeze sprung up at north, which soon after increased to a fresh gale, and fixed at northeast. With this we steered south till noon on the 20th, when being now in the latitude of 62 degrees 34 minutes south, longitude 116 degrees 24 minutes west, we were again becalmed. End of Book 2, Chapter 6, Part 1. Chapter 6, Part 2 of A Voyage Towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1 by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Book 2, Chapter 6, Route of the Ship from New Zealand in Search of a Continent, Part 2. In this situation we had 2 ice islands in sight, one of which seemed to be as large as any we had seen. It could not be less than 200 feet in height, and terminated in a peak not unlike the cupola of St. Paul's Church. At this time we had a great westerly swell, which made it improbable that any land should lie between us and the meridian of 133½ degrees, which was our longitude, under the latitude we were now in, when we stood to the north. In all this route we had not seen the least thing that could induce us to think we were ever in the neighbourhood of any land. We had indeed frequently seen pieces of seaweed, but this, I am well assured, is no sign of the vicinity of land, for weed is seen in every part of the ocean. After a few hours' calm we got a wind from south-east, but it was very unsettled and attended with thick snow showers. At length it fixed at south by east, and we stretched to the east. The wind blew fresh, was piercing cold, and attended with snow and sleet. On the 22nd, being in the latitude of 62 degrees 5 minutes south, longitude 112 degrees 24 minutes west, we saw an ice island, an Antarctic petrel, several blue petrels, and some other known birds, but no one thing that gave us the least hopes of finding land. On the 23rd at noon we were in the latitude of 62 degrees 22 minutes south, longitude 110 degrees 24 minutes. In the afternoon we passed an ice island. The wind, which blew fresh, continued to veer to the west, and at 8 o'clock the next morning it was to the north of west, when I steered south by west and south-southwest. At this time we were in the latitude of 63 degrees 20 minutes south, longitude 108 degrees 7 minutes west, and had a great sea from southwest. We continued this course till noon the next day, the 25th, when we steered due south. Our latitude at this time was 65 degrees 24 minutes south, longitude 109 degrees 31 minutes west. The wind was at north. The weather mild and not unpleasant, and not a bit of ice in view. This we thought a little extraordinary, as it was but a month before, and not quite 200 leagues to the east, that we were in a manner blocked up with large islands of ice in this very latitude. Saw a single pintado petrel, some blue petrels, and a few brown albatrosses in the evening, being under the same meridian, and in the latitude of 65 degrees 44 minutes south. The variation was 19 degrees 27 minutes east. But the next morning in the latitude of 66 degrees 20 minutes south, longitude the same as before, it was only 18 degrees 20 minutes east. Probably the mean between the two is the nearest the truth. At this time we had 9 small islands in view, and soon after we came, the third time, within the Antarctic polar circle, in the longitude of 109 degrees 31 minutes west. About noon, seeing the appearance of land to the south-east, we immediately trimmed our sails and stood towards it. Soon after it disappeared, but we did not give it up till 8 o'clock the next morning, when we were well assured that it was nothing but clouds or a fog bank, and then we resumed our course to the south, with a gentle breeze at north-east, attended with a thick fog, snow and sleet. We now began to meet with ice islands more frequently than before, and in the latitude of 69 degrees 38 minutes south, longitude 108 degrees 12 minutes west, we fell in with a field of loose ice. As we began to be in want of water, I hoisted out 2 boats, and took up as much as yielded about 10 tons. This was cold work, but it was now familiar to us. As soon as we had done, we hoisted in the boats, and thereafterwards made short boards over that part of the sea we had in some measure made ourselves acquainted with. For we had now so thick a fog that we could not see 200 yards round us, and as we knew not the extent of the loose ice, I durst not steer to the south till we had clear weather. Thus we spent the night, or rather that part of 24 hours which answered to night, for we had no darkness but what was occasioned by fogs. At 4 o'clock in the morning of the 29th, the fog began to clear away, and the day becoming clear and serene, we again steered to the south with a gentle gale at north-east and north-north-east. The variation was found to be 22 degrees 41 minutes east. This was in the latitude of 69 degrees 45 minutes south, longitude 108 degrees 5 minutes west. And in the afternoon, being in the same longitude and in the latitude of 70 degrees 23 minutes south, it was 24 degrees 31 minutes east. Soon after the sky became clouded and the air very cold. We continued our course to the south, and passed a piece of weed covered with barnacles, which a brown albatross was picking off. At 10 o'clock we passed a very large ice island. It was not less than 3 or 4 miles in circuit. Several more being seen ahead, and the weather becoming foggy, we hauled the wind to the northward, but in less than 2 hours the weather cleared up, and we again stood south. On the 30th, at 4 o'clock in the morning, we perceived the clouds over the horizon to the south, to be of an unusual snow-white brightness, which we knew denounced our approach to field ice. Soon after it was seen from the topmast head, and at 8 o'clock we were close to its edge. It extended east and west far beyond the reach of our sight. In the situation we were in, just the southern half of our horizon was illuminated by the rays of light reflected from the ice to a considerable height. 97 ice hills were distinctly seen within the field, besides those on the outside, many of them very large, and looking like a ridge of mountains, rising one above another till they were lost in the clouds. The outer or northern edge of this immense field was composed of loose or broken ice close packed together, so that it was not possible for anything to enter it. This was about a mile broad, within which was solid ice in one continued compact body. It was rather low and flat, except the hills, but seemed to increase in height as you traced it to the south, in which direction it extended beyond our sight. Such mountains of ice as these, I believe, were never seen in the Greenland seas, at least not that I ever heard or read of, so that we cannot draw a comparison between the ice here and there. It must be allowed that these prodigious ice mountains must add such additional weight to the ice fields which enclose them, as cannot but make a great difference between the navigating this icy sea and that of Greenland. I will not say it was impossible anywhere to get farther to the south, but the attempting it would have been a dangerous and rash enterprise, and what I believe, no man in my situation would have thought of. It was indeed my opinion, as well as the opinion of most on board, that this ice extended quite to the pole, or perhaps joined on some land, to which it had been fixed from the earliest time, and that it is here, that is, to the south of this parallel, where all the ice we find scattered up and down to the north is first formed, and afterwards broken off by gales of wind or other causes, and brought to the north by the currents, which we always found to set in that direction in the higher latitudes. As we drew near this ice, some penguins were heard, but none seen, and but few other birds or any other thing that it would induce us to think that any land was near. And yet I think there must be some to the south behind this ice, but if there is, it can afford no better retreat for birds or any other animals than the ice itself, with which it must be wholly covered. I, who had ambition not only to go farther than any one had been before, but as far as it was possible for man to go, was not sorry at meeting with this interruption, as it in some measure relieved us, at least shortened the dangers and hardships inseparable from the navigation of the southern polar regions. Since, therefore, we could not proceed 1 inch farther to the south, no other reason need be assigned for my tacking and standing back to the north, being at this time in the latitude of 71 degrees 10 minutes south, longitude 106 degrees 54 minutes west. It was happy for us that the weather was clear when we fell in with this ice, and that we discovered it as soon as we did, for we had no sooner tacked than we were involved in a thick fog. The wind was at east and blew a fresh breeze, so that we were enabled to return back over that space we had already made ourselves acquainted with. At noon, the mercury in the thermometer stood at 32.5 degrees, and we found the air exceedingly cold. The thick fog, continuing with showers of snow, gave a coat of ice to our rigging of near an inch thick. In the afternoon of the next day the fog cleared away at intervals, but the weather was cloudy and gloomy, and the air excessively cold. However, the sea within our horizon was clear of ice. 1774 February. We continued to stand to the north with the wind easterly till the afternoon on the 1st of February, when falling in with some loose ice which had been broken from an island to windward, we hoisted out 2 boats, and having taken some on board, resumed our course to the north and northeast, with gentle breezes from south-east, attended sometimes with fair weather, and at other times with snow and sleet. On the 4th we were in the latitude of 65 degrees 42 minutes south, longitude 99 degrees 44 minutes. The next day the wind was very unsettled both in strength and position, and attended with snow and sleet. At length, on the 6th, after a few hours calm, we got a breeze at south, which soon after freshened, fixed at west-south-west, and was attended with snow and sleet. I now came to the resolution to proceed to the north, and to spend the ensuing winter within the tropic, if I met with no employment before I came there. I was now well satisfied no continent was to be found in this ocean, but what must lie so far to the south as to be wholly inaccessible on account of ice; and that if one should be found in the southern Atlantic Ocean, it would be necessary to have the whole summer before us to explore it. On the other hand, upon a supposition that there is no land there, we undoubtedly might have reached the Cape of Good Hope by April, and so have put an end to the expedition, so far as it related to the finding a continent, which indeed was the first object of the voyage. But for me at this time to have quitted the southern Pacific Ocean, with a good ship expressly sent out on discoveries, a healthy crew, and not in want either of stores or of provisions, would have been betraying not only a want of perseverance, but of judgment, in supposing the South Pacific Ocean to have been so well explored that nothing remained to be done in it. This, however, was not my opinion; for though I had proved that there was no continent but what must lie far to the south, there remained nevertheless room for very large islands, in places wholly unexamined, and many of those which were formerly discovered are but imperfectly explored, and their situations as imperfectly known. I was besides of opinion that my remaining in this sea some time longer would be productive of improvements in navigation and geography as well as in other sciences. I had several times communicated my thoughts on this subject to Captain Furneaux, but as it then wholly depended on what we might meet with to the south, I could not give it in orders without running a risk of drawing us from the main object. Since now nothing had happened to prevent me from carrying these views into execution, my intention was first to go in search of the land said to have been discovered by Juan Fernandez, above a century ago, in about the latitude of 38 degrees. If I should fail in finding this land, then to go in search of Easter Island or Davis's Land, whose situation was known with so little certainty that the attempts lately made to find it had miscarried. I next intended to go within the tropic, and then proceed to the west, touching at and settling the situations of such islands as we might meet with till we arrived at Otaheite, where it was necessary I should stop to look for the Adventure. I had also thoughts of running as far west as the Terra Australians de Espiritu Santo, discovered by Quiros, and to which M. de Bougainville calls the Great Cyclades. Quiros speaks of this land as being large, or lying in the neighbourhood of large lands, and as this was a point which M. de Bougainville had neither confirmed nor refuted, I thought it was worth clearing up. From this land my design was to steer to the south, and so back to the east, between the latitudes of 50 and 60 degrees, intending, if possible, to be the length of Cape Horn in November next, when we should have the best part of a summer before us, to explore the southern part of the Atlantic Ocean. Great as this design appeared to be, I however thought it possible to be executed, and when I came to communicate it to the officers, I had the satisfaction to find that they all heartily concurred in it. I should not do these gentlemen justice if I did not take some opportunity to declare that they always showed the utmost readiness to carry into execution, in the most effectual manner, every measure I thought proper to take. Under such circumstances it is hardly necessary to say that the seamen were always obedient and alert. and on this occasion they were so far from wishing the voyage at an end, that they rejoiced at the prospect of its being prolonged another year, and of soon enjoying the benefits of a milder climate. I now steered north, inclining to the east, and in the evening we were overtaken with a furious storm at west-south-west, attended with snow and sleet. It came so suddenly upon us, that before we could take in our sails, 2 old topsails, which we had bent to the yards, were blown to pieces, and the other sails much damaged. The gale lasted, without the least intermission, till the next morning, when it began to abate. It continued, however, to blow very fresh till noon on the 12th, when it ended in a calm. At this time we were in the latitude of 50° 14' south, longitude 95° 18' west. Some birds being about the ship, we took the advantage of the calm to put a boat in the water and shot several birds, on which we feasted the next day. One of these birds was of that sort which has been so often mentioned in this journal, under the name of Port Egmont hens. They are of the gull kind, about the size of a raven, with a dark brown plumage except the underside of each wing, where there are some white feathers. The rest of the birds were albatrosses and shearwaters. After a few hours calm, having got a breeze at northwest, we made a stretch to the southwest for 24 hours, in which route we saw a piece of wood, a bunch of weed, and a diving petrel. The wind having veered more to the west, made us tack and stretch to the north till noon on the 14th, at which time we were in the latitude of 49° 32' south, longitude 95° 11' west. We had now calms and light breezes succeeding each other till the next morning, when the wind freshened at west-north-west, and was attended with a thick fog and drizzling rain the 3 following days, during which time we stretched to the north, inclining to the east, and crossed my track to Otaheite in 1769. I did intend to have kept more to the west, but the strong winds from that direction put it out of my power. On the 18th the wind veered to southwest and blew very fresh, but was attended with clear weather, which gave us an opportunity to ascertain our longitude by several lunar observations made by Messrs Wales, Clark, Gilbert, and Smith. The mean result of all was 94° 19' 30" west. Mr Kendall's watch at the same time gave 94° 46' west. Our latitude was 43° 53' south. The wind continued not long at southwest before it veered back to the west and west-northwest. As we advanced to the north, we felt a most sensible change in the weather. The 20th at noon we were in the latitude of 39° 58' south, longitude 94° 37' west. The day was clear and pleasant, and, I may say, the only summer's day we had had since we left New Zealand. The mercury in the thermometer rose to 66. We still continued to steer to the north, as the wind remained in the old quarter, and the next day at noon we were in the latitude of 37° 54' south, which was the same that Juan Fernandez's Discovery is said to lie in. We, however, had not the least signs of any land lying in our neighbourhood. The next day at noon we were in latitude 36° 10' south, longitude 94° 56' west. Soon after, the wind veered to south-south-east, and enabled us to steer west-south-west, which I thought the most probable direction to find the land of which we were in search. And yet I had no hopes of succeeding, as we had a large hollow swell from the same point. We, however, continued this course till the 25th, when the wind having veered again round to the westward, I gave it up, and stood away to the north, in order to get into the latitude of Easter Island. Our latitude at this time was 37° 52', longitude 101° 10' west. I was now well assured that the discovery of Juan Fernandez, if any such was ever made, can be nothing but a small island, there being hardly room for a large land, as will fully appear by the tracks of Captain Wallis, Bougainville of the Endeavour, and this of the Resolution. Whoever wants to see an account of the discovery in question will meet with it in Mr. Dalrymple's collection of voyages to the South Seas. This gentleman places it under the meridian of 90 degrees, which I think it cannot be, for Monsieur de Bougainville seems to have run down under that meridian, and we had now examined the latitude in which it is said to lie, from the meridian of 94 degrees to 101 degrees. It is not probable it can lie to the east of 90 degrees, because if it did, it must have been seen, at one time or other, by ships bound from the northern to the southern parts of America. Mr. Palgrave, in a little treatise concerning the transit of Venus, published in 1768, gives some account of land having been discovered by the Spaniards in 1714, in the latitude of 38 degrees, and 550 leagues from the coast of Chile, which is in the longitude of 110 or 111 degrees west, and within a degree or two of my track in the Endeavour, so that this can hardly be its situation. In short, the only probable situation it can have must be about the meridian of 106 degrees or 108 degrees west, and then it can only be a small isle, as I have already observed. I was now taken ill of the bilious colic, which was so violent as to confine me to my bed, so that the management of the ship was left to Mr. Cooper, the first officer, who conducted her very much to my satisfaction. It was several days before the most dangerous symptoms of my disorder were removed, during which time Mr. Patten the surgeon was to me not only a skilful physician, but an affectionate nurse; and I should ill deserve the care he bestowed on me if I did not make this public acknowledgment. When I began to recover, a favourite dog belonging to Mr. Forster fell a sacrifice to my tender stomach. We had no other fresh meat on board, and I could eat of this flesh as well as broth made of it, when I could taste nothing else. Thus I received nourishment and strength from food which would have made most people in Europe sick. So true it is, that necessity is governed by no law. On the 28th, in the latitude of 33 degrees 7' south, longitude 102 degrees 33' west, we began to see flying fish, egg birds, and noddies, which are said not to go above 60 or 80 leagues from land; but of this we have no certainty. No one yet knows to what distance any of the oceanic birds go to sea. For my own part, I do not believe there is one in the whole tribe that can be relied on, in pointing out the vicinity of land. In the latitude of 30 degrees 30' south, longitude 101 degrees 45' west, we began to see men of war birds. In the latitude of 29 degrees 44', longitude 100 degrees 45' west, we had a calm of nearly 2 days together, during which time the heat was intolerable, but what ought to be remarked, there was a great swell from the southwest. 1774 March. On the 6th of March the calm was succeeded by an easterly wind, with which we steered northwest till noon the 8th, when, being in the latitude of 27 degrees 4' south, longitude 103 degrees 58' west, we steered west, meeting every day with great numbers of birds, such as men of war, tropic and egg birds, poddies, shearwaters, etc. And once we passed several pieces of sponge, and a small dried leaf, not unlike a bay one. Soon after we saw a sea snake, in every respect like those we had before seen at the tropical islands. We also saw plenty of fish, but we were such bad fishers that we caught only 4 albacores, which were very acceptable to me especially, who was just recovering from my late illness. End of Book 2, Chapter 6, Part 2. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 7 of A Voyage Towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1 by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Book 2, Chapter 7. Sequel of The Passage from New Zealand to Easter Island and Transactions there, with an account of an expedition to discover the inland part of the country, and a description of some of the surprising gigantic statues found in the island. 1774 March. At 8 o'clock in the morning on the 11th, land was seen from the masthead, bearing west, and at noon from the deck, extending from west 3/4 north to west by south, about 12 leagues distance. I made no doubt that this was Davis's land, or Easter Island, as its appearance from this situation corresponded very well with Wafer's account, and we expected to have seen the low sandy isle that Davis fell in with, which would have been a confirmation. But in this we were disappointed. At 7 o'clock in the evening the island bore from north 62 west to north 87 west, about 5 leagues distance, in which situation we sounded without finding ground with a line of 140 fathoms. Here we spent the night, having alternately light airs and calms, till 10 o'clock the next morning, when a breeze sprung up at west-south-west. With this we stretched in for the land, and with the help of our glass discovered people, and some of those colossal statues or idols mentioned in the account of Roggevein's voyage. At 4 o'clock p.m. we were half a league south-south-east and north-north-west of the north-east point of the island, and on sounding found 35 fathoms a dark sandy bottom. I now tacked and endeavoured to get into what appeared to be a bay on the west side of the point or south-east side of the island, but before this could be accomplished night came upon us, and we stood on and off under the land till the next morning, having sounding from 75 to 110 fathoms the same bottom as before. On the 13th, about 8 o'clock in the morning, the wind, which had been variable most part of the night, fixed at south-east and blew in squalls, accompanied with rain, but it was not long before the weather became fair. As the wind now blew right to the south-east shore, which does not afford that shelter I at first thought, I resolved to look for anchorage on the west and north-west sides of the island. With this view I bore up round the south point, of which lie 2 small islets, the one nearest the point high and peaked, and the other low and flattish. After getting round the point and coming before a sandy beach, we found soundings 30 and 40 fathoms, sandy ground, and about 1 mile from the shore. Here a canoe, conducted by 2 men, came off to us. They brought with them a bunch of plantains, which they sent into the ship by a rope, and then they returned to shore. This gave us a good opinion of the islanders, and inspired us with hopes of getting some refreshments, which we were in great want of. I continued to range along the coast till we opened the northern point of the isle, without seeing a better anchoring place than the one we had passed. We therefore tacked and plied back to it, and in the meantime sent away the master in a boat to sound the coast. He returned about 5 o'clock in the evening, and soon after we came into an anchor in 36 fathoms water, before the sandy beach above mentioned. As the master drew near the shore with a boat, one of the natives swam off to her, and insisted on coming aboard the ship, where he remained 2 nights and a day. The first thing he did after coming aboard was to measure the length of the ship, by fathoming her from the taffrail to the stern, and as he counted the fathoms, we observed that he called the numbers by the same names that they do at Otaheite. Nevertheless his language was in a manner wholly unintelligible to all of us. Having anchored too near the edge of a bank, a fresh breeze from the land, about 3 o'clock the next morning, drove us off it, on which the anchor was heaved up and sail made to regain the bank again. While the ship was plying in, I went ashore, accompanied by some of the gentlemen, to see what the island was likely to afford us. We landed at the sandy beach, where some hundreds of the natives were assembled, and who were so impatient to see us, that many of them swam off to meet the boats. Not one of them had so much as a stick or weapon of any sort in their hands. After distributing a few trinkets amongst them, we made signs for something to eat, on which they brought down a few potatoes, plantains, and sugar canes, and exchanged them for nails, looking glasses, and pieces of cloth. We presently discovered that they were as expert thieves and as tricking in their exchanges as any people we had yet met with. It was with some difficulty that we could keep the hats on our heads, but hardly possible to keep anything in our pockets, not even what themselves had sold us, for they would watch every opportunity to snatch it from us, so that we sometimes bought the same thing 2 or 3 times over, and after all did not get it. Before I sailed from England, I was informed that a Spanish ship had visited this isle in 1769. Some signs of it were seen among the people now about us. One man had a pretty good broad-brimmed European hat on, another had a grego jacket, and another a red silk handkerchief. They also seemed to know the use of a musket, and to stand in much awe of it, but this they probably learned from Roggevine, who, if we are to believe the authors of that voyage, left them sufficient tokens. Near the place where we landed were some of those statues before mentioned, which I shall describe in another place. The country appeared barren and without wood. There were, nevertheless, several plantations of potatoes, plantains, and sugar canes. We also saw some fowls, and found a well of brackish water. As these were articles we were in want of, and as the natives seemed not unwilling to part with them, I resolved to stay a day or 2. With this view I repaired on board, and brought the ship to an anchor in 32 fathoms water, the bottom a fine dark sand. Our station was about a mile from the nearest shore, the south point of a small bay, in the bottom of which is the sandy beach before mentioned, being east-south-east, distant 1.5 miles. The 2 rocky islets lying off the south point of the island were just shut behind a point to the north of them. They bore south 3/4 west, 4 miles distant, and the other extreme of the island bore north 25° east, distant about 6 miles. But the best mark for this anchoring place is the beach, because it is the only one on this side of the island. In the afternoon we got on board a few casks of water, and opened a trade with the natives for such things as they had to dispose of. Some of the gentlemen also made an excursion into the country to see what it produced, and returned again in the evening, with the loss only of a hat, which one of the natives snatched off the head of one of the party. Early next morning I sent Lieutenants Pickersgill and Edgecombe with a party of men, accompanied by several of the gentlemen, to examine the country. As I was not sufficiently recovered from my late illness to make one of the party, I was obliged to content myself with remaining at the landing place among the natives. We had at one time a pretty brisk trade with them for potatoes, which we observed they dug up out of an adjoining plantation. But this traffic, which was very advantageous to us, was soon put a stop to by the owner, as we supposed, of the plantation coming down, and driving all the people out of it. By this we concluded that he had been robbed of his property, and that they were not less scrupulous of stealing from one another than from us, on whom they practised every little fraud they could think of, and generally with success. For we no sooner detected them in one than they found out another. About 7 o'clock in the evening the party I had sent into the country returned, after having been over the greatest part of the island. They left the beach about 9 o'clock in the morning, and took a path which led across to the south-east side of the island, followed by a great crowd of the natives, who pressed much upon them. But they had not proceeded far before a middle-aged man, punctured from head to foot, and his face painted with a sort of white pigment, appeared with a spear in his hand, and walked alongside of them, making signs to his countrymen to keep at a distance, and not to molest our people. When he had pretty well effected this, he hoisted a piece of white cloth on his spear, placed himself in the front, and led the way, with his ensign of peace, as they understood it to be. For the greatest part of the distance across, the ground had but a barren appearance, being a dry hard clay, and everywhere covered with stones. But notwithstanding this, there were several large tracts planted with potatoes, and some plantain walks, but they saw no fruit on any of the trees. Towards the highest part of the south end of the island, the soil, which was a fine red earth, seemed much better, bore a longer grass, and was not covered with stones as in the other parts. But here they saw neither house nor plantation. On the east side, near the sea, they met with 3 platforms of stonework, or rather the ruins of them. On each had stood 4 of those large statues, but they were all fallen down from 2 of them, and also one from the 3rd. All except one were broken by the fall, or in some measure defaced. Mr. Wales measured this one, and found it to be 15 feet in length, and 6 feet broad over the shoulders. Each statue had on its head a large cylindric stone of a red colour, wrought perfectly round. The one they measured, which was not by far the largest, was 52 inches high and 66 in diameter. In some, the upper corner of the cylinder was taken off in a sort of concave quarter round, but in others the cylinder was entire. From this place they followed the direction of the coast to the northeast, the man with the flag still leading the way. For about 3 miles they found the country very barren, and in some places stripped of the soil to the bare rock, which seemed to be a poor sort of iron ore. Beyond this, they came to the most fertile part of the island they saw, it being interspersed with plantations of potatoes, sugar canes, and plantain trees, and these not so much encumbered with stones as those which they had seen before. But they could find no water, except what the natives twice or thrice brought them, which, though brackish and stinking, was rendered acceptable by the extremity of their thirst. They also passed some huts, the owners of which met them with roasted potatoes and sugar canes, and placing themselves ahead of the foremost party, for they marched in a line in order to have the benefit of the path, gave one to each man as he passed by. They observed the same method in distributing the water which they brought, and were particularly careful that the foremost did not drink too much, lest none should be left for the hindmost. But at the very time these were relieving the thirsty and hungry, there were not wanting others who endeavoured to steal from them the very things which had been given them. At last, to prevent worse consequences, they were obliged to fire a load of small shot at one who was so audacious as to snatch from one of the men the bag which contained everything they carried with them. The shot hit him on the back, on which he dropped the bag, ran a little way, and then fell. but he afterwards got up and walked, and what became of him they knew not, nor whether he was much wounded. As this affair occasioned some delay and drew the natives together, they presently saw the man who had hitherto led the way, and one or two more, coming running towards them, but instead of stopping when they came up, they continued to run round them, repeating in a kind manner a few words until our people set forwards again. Then their old guide hoisted his flag, leading the way as before, and none ever attempted to steal from them the whole day afterwards. As they passed along, they observed on a hill a number of people collected together, some of whom had spears in their hands, but on their being called to by their countrymen, they dispersed, except a few, amongst whom was one seemingly of some note. He was a stout, well-made man, with a fine open countenance. His face was painted, his body punctured, and he wore a better ha-how, or cloth, than the rest. He saluted them as they came up, by stretching out his arms, with both hands clenched, lifting them over his head, opening them wide, and then letting them fall gradually down to his sides. To this man, whom they understood to be chief of the island, their other friend gave his white flag, and he gave him another, who carried it before them the remainder of the day. Towards the eastern end of the island they met with a well whose water was perfectly fresh, being considerably above the level of the sea, but it was dirty owing to the filthiness or cleanliness, call it what you will, of the natives, who never go to drink without washing themselves all over as soon as they have done, and if ever so many of them are together, the first leaps right into the middle of the hole, drinks and washes himself without the least ceremony, after which another takes his place and does the same. They observed that this side of the island was full of those gigantic statues so often mentioned, some placed in groups on platforms of masonry, others single, fixed only in the earth, and that not deep, and these latter are in general much larger than the others. Having measured one which had fallen down, they found it very near 27 feet long, and upwards of 8 feet over the breast or shoulders, and yet this appeared considerably short of the size of one they saw standing, its shade a little past 2 o'clock, being sufficient to shelter all the party, consisting of near 30 persons, from the rays of the sun. Here they stopped to dine, after which they repaired to a hill, from whence they saw all the east and north shores of the isle, on which they could not see either bay or creek fit even for a boat to land in, nor the least signs of fresh water. What the natives brought them here was real salt water, but they observed that some of them drank pretty plentifully of it, so far will necessity and custom get the better of nature. On this account they were obliged to return to the last mentioned well, where, after having quenched their thirst, they directed their route across the island towards the ship, as it was now 4 o'clock. In a small hollow on the highest part of the island they met with several such cylinders as are placed on the heads of the statues. Some of these appeared larger than any they had seen before, but it was now too late to stop to measure any of them. Mr. Wales, from whom I had this information, is of opinion that there had been a quarry here, whence these stones had formerly been dug, and that it would have been no difficult matter to roll them down the hill after they were formed. I think this a very reasonable conjecture, and have no doubt that it has been so. On the declivity of the mountain towards the west they met with another well, but the water was a very strong mineral, had a thick green scum on the top, and stunk intolerably. Necessity, however, obliged some to drink of it, but it soon made them so sick they threw it up the same way that it went down. In all this excursion, as well as the one made the preceding day, only 2 or 3 shrubs were seen. The leaf and seed of one, called by the natives toramedo, were not much unlike those of the common vetch, but the pod was more like that of a tamarind in its size and shape. The seeds have a disagreeable bitter taste, and the natives, when they saw our people chew them, made signs to spit them out, from whence it was concluded that they think them poisonous. The wood is of a reddish colour and pretty hard and heavy, but very crooked, small and short, not exceeding 6 or 7 feet in height. At the southwest corner of the island they found another small shrub, whose leaf was white and brittle, and in some measure, as also its leaf, resembling the ash. They also saw in several places the Otaheitan cloth plant, but it was poor and weak, and not above 2½ feet high at most. They saw not an animal of any sort, and but very few birds, nor indeed anything which can induce ships that are not in the utmost distress to touch at this island. This account of the excursion I had from Mr Pickersgill and Mr Wales, men on whose veracity I could depend, and therefore I determined to leave the island the next morning, since nothing was to be obtained that could make it worth my while to stay longer, for the water which we had sent on board was not much better than if it had been taken up out of the sea. We had a calm till 10 o'clock in the morning of the 16th, when a breeze sprung up at west, accompanied with heavy showers of rain, which lasted about an hour. The weather then clearing up, we got under sail, stood to sea, and kept plying to and fro, while an officer was sent on shore with 2 boats, to purchase such refreshments as the natives might have brought down; for I judged this would be the case, as they knew nothing of our sailing. The event proved that I was not mistaken, for the boats made 2 trips before night, when we hoisted them in, and made sail to the northwest, with a light breeze at north-northeast. End of Book 2, Chapter 7. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 8 of A Voyage Towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 8. A description of the island and its produce, situation and inhabitants, their manners and customs, conjectures concerning their government, religion, and other subjects, with a more particular account of the gigantic statues. 1774 March. I shall now give some further account of this island, which is undoubtedly the same that Admiral Roggevane touched at in April 1722, although the description given of it by the authors of that voyage does by no means agree with it now. It may also be the same that was seen by Captain Davis in 1686, for, when seen from the east, it answers very well to Wafer's description, as I have before observed. In short, if this is not the land, his discovery cannot lie far from the coast of America, as this latitude has been well explored from the meridian of 80° to 110°. Captain Carteret carried it much further, but his track seems to have been a little too far south. Had I found fresh water, I intended spending some days in looking for the low sandy isle Davis fell in with, which would have determined the point; but as I did not find water, and had a long run to make before I was assured of getting any, and being in want of refreshments, I declined the search, as a small delay might have been attended with bad consequences to the crew, many of them beginning to be more or less affected with the scurvy. No nation need contend for the honour of the discovery of this island, as there can be few places which afford less convenience for shipping than it does. Here is no safe anchorage, no wood for fuel, nor any fresh water worth taking on board. Nature has been exceedingly sparing of her favours to this spot. As everything must be raised by dint of labour, it cannot be supposed that the inhabitants plant much more than is sufficient for themselves, and as they are but few in number, they cannot have much to spare to supply the wants of visitant strangers. The produce is sweet potatoes, yams, tara or eddy root, plantains and sugar canes, all pretty good, the potatoes especially, which are the best of the kind I ever tasted. Gourds they have also, but so very few, that a cocoa-nut shell was the most valuable thing we could give them. They have a few tame fowls, such as cocks and hens, small but well tasted. They have also rats, which it seems they eat, for I saw a man with some dead ones in his hand, and he seemed unwilling to part with them, giving me to understand they were for food. Of land birds there were hardly any, and sea birds but few. These were men of war, tropic and egg birds, noddies, tern, etc. The coast seemed not to abound with fish, at least we could catch none with hook and line, and it was but very little we saw among the natives. Such is the produce of Easter Island, or Davis's Land, which is situated in 27 degrees 5 minutes 30 seconds south, longitude 109 degrees 46 minutes 20 seconds west. It is about 10 or 12 leagues in circuit, hath a hilly and stony surface, and an iron-bound shore. The hills are of such a height as to be seen 15 or 16 leagues. Off the south end are 2 rocky islets lying near the shore. The north and east points of the island rise directly from the sea to a considerable height. Between them and the south-east side the shore forms an open bay, in which I believe the Dutch anchored. We anchored, as hath been already mentioned, on the west side of the island, 3 miles to the north of the south point, with the sandy beach bearing east-south-east. This is a very good road with easterly winds, but a dangerous one with westerly, as the other on the south-east side must be with easterly winds. For this, and other bad accommodations already mentioned, nothing but necessity will induce any one to touch at this isle, unless it can be done without getting much out of the way, in which case touching here may be advantageous, as the people willingly and readily part with such refreshments as they have, and at an easy rate. We certainly received great benefit from the little we got, but few ships can come here without being in want of water, and this want cannot be here supplied. The little we took on board could not be made use of, being only salt water which had filtered through a stony beach into a stone well. This the natives had made for the purpose, a little to the southward of the sandy beach so often mentioned, and the water ebbed and flowed into it with the tide. The inhabitants of this island do not seem to exceed 600 or 700 souls, and above 2/3 of those we saw were males. They either have but few females amongst them, or else many were restrained from making their appearance during our stay, for though we saw nothing to induce us to believe the men were of a jealous disposition, or the women afraid to appear in public, something of this kind was probably the case. In colour, features, and language, they bear such an affinity to the people of the more western isles, that no one will doubt they have had the same origin. It is extraordinary that the same nation should have spread themselves over all the isles in this vast ocean, from New Zealand to this island, which is almost 1/4 part of the circumference of the globe. Many of them have now no other knowledge of each other than what is preserved by antiquated tradition, and they have, by length of time, become, as it were, different nations, each having adopted some peculiar custom or habit, etc. Nevertheless, a careful observer will soon see the affinity each has to the other. In general, the people of this isle are a slender race. I did not see a man that would measure 6 feet. So far are they from being giants, as one of the authors of Roggevein's Voyage asserts. They are brisk and active, have good features, and not disagreeable countenances, are friendly and hospitable to strangers, but as much addicted to pilfering as any of their neighbours. Tattooing, or puncturing the skin, is much used here. The men are marked from head to foot, with figures all nearly alike, only some give them one direction and some another, as fancy leads. The women are but little punctured. Red and white paint is an ornament with them, as also with the men. The former is made of turmeric, but what composes the latter I know not. Their clothing is a piece or two of quilted cloth, about 6 feet by 4, or a mat. One piece wrapped round their loins and another over their shoulders make a complete dress. But the men, for the most part, are in a manner naked, wearing nothing but a slip of cloth betwixt their legs, each end of which is fastened to a cord or belt they wear round the waist. Their cloth is made of the same materials as at Otaheite, viz. Of the bark of the cloth plant. But, as they have but little of it, our Otaheitean cloth, or indeed any sort of it, came here to a good market. Their hair in general is black. The women wear it long, and sometimes tied up on the crown of the head. But the men wear it, and their beards, cropped short. Their head-dress is a round fillet adorned with feathers, and a straw bonnet something like a Scotch one. The former, I believe, being chiefly worn by the men, and the latter by the women. Both men and women have very large holes, or rather slits, in their ears, extending to near 3 inches in length. They sometimes turn this slit over the upper part, and then the ear looks as if the flap was cut off. The chief ear ornaments are the white down of feathers and rings, which they wear in the inside of the hole, made of some elastic substance, rolled up like a watch spring. I judged this was to keep the hole at its utmost extension. I do not remember seeing them wear any other ornaments, excepting amulets made of bone or shells. As harmless and friendly as these people seem to be, they are not without offensive weapons, such as short wooden clubs and spears, the latter of which are crooked sticks about 6 feet long, armed at one end with pieces of flint. They have also a weapon made of wood, like the patu patu of New Zealand. Their houses are low miserable huts, constructed by setting sticks upright in the ground at 6 or 8 feet distance, then bending them towards each other, and tying them together at the top, forming thereby a kind of Gothic arch. The longest sticks are placed in the middle, and shorter ones each way, and less distance asunder, by which means the building is highest and broadest in the middle, and lower and narrower towards each end. To these are tied others horizontally, and the whole is thatched over with leaves of sugar cane. The doorway is in the middle of one side, formed like a porch, and so low and narrow as just to admit a man to enter upon all fours. The largest house I saw was about 60 feet long, 8 or 9 feet high in the middle, and 3 or 4 at each end. Its breadth at these parts was nearly equal to its height. Some have a kind of vaulted houses built with stone and partly underground, but I never was in one of these. I saw no household utensils among them except gourds, and of these but very few. They were extravagantly fond of cocoa-nut shells, more so than of any thing we could give them. They dressed their victuals in the same manner as Otaheite, that is, with hot stones in an oven or hole in the ground. The straw or tops of sugar cane, plantain heads, etc., serve them for fuel to heat the stones. Plantains, which require but little dressing, they roast under fires of straw, dried grass, etc., and the whole races of them are ripened or roasted in this manner. We frequently saw 10 or a dozen or more such fires in one place, and most commonly in the mornings and evenings. Not more than 3 or 4 canoes were seen at the whole island, and these very mean, and built of many pieces sewed together with small line. They are about 18 or 20 feet long, head and stem carved or raised a little, are very narrow and fitted with outriggers. They do not seem capable of carrying above 4 persons, and are by no means fit for any distant navigation. As small and mean as these canoes were, it was a matter of wonder to us where they got the wood to build them with, for in one of them was a board 6 or 8 feet long, 14 inches broad at one end and 8 at the other, whereas we did not see a stick on the island that would have made a board half this size, nor indeed was there another piece in the whole canoe half as big. There are 2 ways by which it is possible they may have got this large wood. It may have been left here by the Spaniards, or it might have been driven on the shore of the island from some distant land. It is even possible there may be some land in the neighbourhood from whence they might have got it. We, however, saw no signs of any, nor could we get the least information on this head from the natives, although we tried every method we could think of to obtain it. We were almost as unfortunate in our inquiries for the proper or native name of the island, for on comparing notes I found we had got 3 different names for it, viz. Tamareki, Waihu, and Tiapi. Without pretending to say which, or whether any of them is right, I shall only observe that the last was obtained by Oedidi, who understood their language much better than any of us, though even he understood it but very imperfectly. It appears by the account of Roggewein's voyage, that these people had no better vessels than when he first visited them. The want of materials and not of genius seems to be the reason why they have made no improvement in this art. Some pieces of carving were found amongst them, both well designed and executed. Their plantations are prettily laid out by line, but not enclosed by any fence. Indeed, they have nothing for this purpose but stones. I have no doubt that all these plantations are private property, and that there are here, as at Otaheite, chiefs, which they call Arikis, to whom these plantations belong. But of the power or authority of these chiefs, or of the government of these people, I confess myself quite ignorant. Nor are we better acquainted with their religion. The gigantic statues so often mentioned are not, in my opinion, looked upon as idols by the present inhabitants, whatever they might have been in the days of the Dutch. At least I saw nothing that could induce me to think so. On the contrary, I rather suppose that they are burying places for certain tribes or families. I, as well as some others, saw a human skeleton lying in one of the platforms just covered with stones. Some of these platforms of masonry are 30 or 40 feet long, 12 or 16 broad, and from 3 to 12 in height, which last in some measure depends on the nature of the ground, for they are generally at the brink of the bank facing the sea, so that this face may be 10 or 12 feet or more high, and the other may not be above 3 or 4. They are built, or rather faced, with hewn stones, of a very large size, and the workmanship is not inferior to the best plain piece of masonry we have in England. They use no sort of cement, yet the joints are exceedingly close, and the stones mortised and tenanted one into another in a very artful manner. The side walls are not perpendicular, but inclining a little inwards, in the same manner that breastworks, etc., are built in Europe. Yet had not all this care, pains, and sagacity been able to preserve these curious structures from the ravages of all devouring time. The statues, or at least many of them, are erected on these platforms, which serve as foundations. They are, as near as we could judge, about half length, ending in a sort of stump at the bottom, on which they stand. The workmanship is rude but not bad, nor are the features of the face ill-formed, the nose and chin in particular, but the ears are long beyond proportion, and as to the bodies, there is hardly anything like a human figure about them. I had an opportunity of examining only 2 or 3 of these statues, which are near the landing place, and they were of a grey stone, seemingly of the same sort as that with which the platforms were built. But some of the gentlemen who travelled over the island and examined many of them, were of opinion that the stone of which they were made was different from any they saw on the island, and had much the appearance of being fractitious. We could hardly conceive how these islanders, wholly unacquainted with any mechanical power, could raise such stupendous figures, and afterwards place the large cylindric stones before mentioned upon their heads. The only method I can conceive is by raising the upper end by little and little, supporting it by stones as it is raised, and building about it till they got it erect. Thus a sort of mount or scaffolding would be made, upon which they might roll the cylinder, and place it upon the head of the statue, and then the stones might be removed from about it. But if the stones are fractitious, the statues might have been put together on the place, in their present position, and the cylinder put on by building a mount round them, as above mentioned. But let them have been made and set up by this or any other method, they must have been a work of immense time, and sufficiently show the ingenuity and perseverance of these islanders in the age in which they were built, for the present inhabitants have most certainly had no hand in them, and they do not even repair the foundations of those which are going to decay. They give different names to them, such as Gotu Moara, Marapate, Canaro, Goe Tugu, Mata Mata, etc., etc., to which they sometimes prefix the word Moi, and sometimes annex Ariki. The latter signifies chief, and the former burying or sleeping place, as well as we could understand. Besides the monuments of antiquity, which were pretty numerous, and nowhere but on or near the sea coast, there were many little heaps of stones piled up in different places along the coast. 2 or 3 of the uppermost stones in each pile were generally white, perhaps always so, when the pile is complete. It will hardly be doubted that these piles of stones had a meaning. Probably they might mark the place where people had been buried, and serve instead of the large statues. The working tools of these people are but very mean, and like those of all the other islands we had visited in this ocean, made of stone, bone, shells, etc. They set but little value on iron or iron tools, which is the more extraordinary as they know their use, but the reason may be their having but little occasion for them. End of Book 2, Chapter 8. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts. Chapter 9 of A Voyage Towards the South Pole and Round the World, Volume 1, by James Cook. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by David Cole. Chapter 9. The passage from Easter Island to the Marquesas Islands. Transactions and incidents which happened while the ship lay in Madre de Dios, or Resolution Bay, in the island of St. Christina. 1774 March. After leaving Easter Island I steered northwest by north and north-northwest with a fine easterly gale, intending to touch at the Marquesas, if I met with nothing before I got there. We had not been long at sea, before the bilious disorder made another attack upon me, but not as violent as the former. I believe this second visit was owing to exposing and fatiguing myself too much at Easter Island. On the 22nd, being in the latitude of 19 degrees 20' south, longitude 114 degrees 49' west, steered northwest. Since leaving Easter Island, the variation had not been more than 3 degrees 4 minutes, nor less than 2 degrees 32 minutes east. But on the 26th at 6 a.m., in latitude 15 degrees 7' south, longitude 119 degrees 45' west, it was no more than 1 degree 1 minute east, after which it began to increase. On the 29th, being in the latitude of 10 degrees 20 minutes, longitude 123 degrees 58' west, altered the course to west-northwest, and the next day to west, being then in latitude 9 degrees 24 minutes, which I judged to be the parallel of Marquesas, where, as I have before observed, I intended to touch, in order to settle their situation, which I find different in different charts. Having now a steadily settled trade wind and pleasant weather, I ordered the forge to be set up, to repair and make various necessary articles in the iron way, and the caulkers had already been some time at work caulking the decks, weather works, etc. 1774 April. As we advanced to the west, we found the variation to increase but slowly, for on the 3rd of April it was only 4 degrees 40' east, being then in the latitude of 9 degrees 32 minutes, longitude 132 degrees 45 minutes, by observation made at the same time. I continued to steer to the west till the 6th, at 4 in the afternoon, at which time, being in the latitude of 9 degrees 20 minutes, longitude 138 degrees 14' west, we discovered an island bearing west by south, distant about 9 leagues. 2 hours after we saw another bearing southwest by south, which appeared more extensive than the former. I hauled up for this island, and ran under an easy sail all night, having squally unsettled rainy weather, which is not very uncommon in this sea, when near high land. At 6 o'clock the next morning, the first island bore northwest, the second southwest a half west, and a third west. I gave orders to steer for the separation between the two last, and soon after a fourth was seen, still more to the west. By this time we were well assured that these were the Marquesas, discovered by Mendana in 1595. The first isle was a new discovery, which I named Hood's Island, after the young gentleman who first saw it. The second was that of St Pedro, the third La Dominica, and the fourth St Christina. We ranged the south-east coast of La Dominica, without seeing the least signs of anchorage, till we came to the channel that divides it from St Christiana, through which we passed, hauled over for the last mentioned island, and ran along the coast to the southwest in search of Mendana's port. We passed several coves in which there seemed to be anchorage, but a great surf broke on all the shores. Some canoes put off from these places, and followed us down the coast. At length, having come before the port we were in search of, we attempted to turn into it, the wind being right out; but as it blew in violent squalls from this high land, one of these took us just after we had put in stays, paid the ship off again, and before she wore round, she was within a few yards of being driven against the rocks to leeward. This obliged us to stand out to sea, and to make a stretch to windward, after which we stood in again, and without attempting to turn, anchored in the entrance of the bay in 34 fathoms water, a fine sandy bottom. This was no sooner done than about 30 or 40 of the natives came off to us in 10 or 12 canoes, but it required some address to get them alongside. At last a hatchet and some spike nails induced the people in one canoe to come under the quarter gallery, after which all the others put alongside, and having exchanged some breadfruit and fish for small nails, etc., retired ashore, the sun being already set. We observed a heap of stones on the bow of each canoe, and every man to have a sling tied round his hand. Very early next morning the natives visited us again in much greater numbers than before, bringing with them breadfruit, plantains, and one pig, all of which they exchanged for nails, etc. But in this traffic they would frequently keep our goods and make no return, till at last I was obliged to fire a musket ball over one man, who had several times served it in this manner, after which they dealt more fairly, and soon after several of them came on board. At this time we were preparing to warp further into the bay, and I was going in a boat, to look for the most convenient place to moor the ship in. Observing too many of the natives on board, I said to the officers, "You must look well after these people, or they will certainly carry off something or another." I had hardly got into the boat, before I was told they had stolen one of the iron stanchions from the opposite gangway, and were making off with it. I ordered them to fire over the canoe till I could get round in the boat, but not to kill any one. But the natives made too much noise for me to be heard, and the unhappy thief was killed at the third shot. Two others in the same canoe leaped overboard, but got in again just as I came to them. The stanchion they had thrown overboard. One of them, a man grown, sat bailing the blood and water out of the canoe, in a kind of hysteric laugh. The other, a youth about 14 or 15 years of age, looked on the deceased with a serious and dejected countenance. We had afterwards reason to believe he was his son. At this unhappy accident all the natives retired with precipitation. I followed them into the bay, and prevailed upon the people in one canoe to come alongside the boat and receive some nails and other things which I gave them. This in some measure allayed their fears. Having taken a view of the bay, and found that fresh water, which we most wanted, was to be had, I returned on board and carried out a kedge anchor with 3 hawsers upon an end, to warp the ship in by, and hove short on the bower. One would have thought that the natives, by this time, would have been so sensible of the effect of our firearms, as not to have provoked us to fire upon them any more, but the event proved otherwise; for the boat had not sooner left the kedge anchor than 2 men in a canoe put off from the shore, took hold of the buoy rope, and attempted to drag it ashore, little considering what was fast to it. Lest, after discovering their mistake, they should take away the buoy, I ordered a musket to be fired at them. The ball fell short, and they took not the least notice of it; but a second having passed over them, they let go the buoy, and made for the shore. This was the last shot we had occasion to fire at any of them, while we lay at this place. It probably had more effect than killing the man, by showing them that they were not safe at any distance. At least we had reason to think so, for they afterwards stood in great dread of the musket. Nevertheless, they would very often be exercising their talent of thieving upon us, which I thought proper to put up with, as our stay was not likely to be long amongst them. The trouble these people gave us retarded us so long, that before we were ready to heave the anchor, the wind began to increase and blow in squalls out of the bay, so that we were obliged to lie fast. It was not long before the natives ventured off to us again. In the first canoe which came, was a man who seemed to be of some consequence. He advanced slowly, with a pig on his shoulder, and speaking something which we did not understand. As soon as he got alongside, I made him a present of a hatchet and several other articles. In return he sent in his pig, and was at last prevailed upon to come himself up to the gangway, where he made but a short stay. The reception this man met with induced the people in all the other canoes to put alongside, and exchanges were presently re-established. Matters being thus settled on board, I went on shore with a party of men, to see what was to be done there. We were received by the natives with great courtesy, and, as if nothing had happened, trafficked with them for some fruit and a few small pigs, and after loading the launch with water, returned aboard. After dinner I sent the boats ashore for water under the protection of a guard. On their landing the natives all fled but one man, and he seemed much frightened. Afterwards 1 or 2 more came down, and these were all that were seen this afternoon. We could not conceive the reason of this sudden flight. Early in the morning of the 9th the boats were sent as usual for water, and just as they were coming off, but not before, some of the natives made their appearance. After breakfast I landed some little time before the guard, when the natives crowded round me in great numbers, but as soon as the guard landed, I had enough to do to keep them from running off. At length their fears vanished, and a trade was opened for fruit and pigs. I believe the reason of the natives flying from our people the day before was their not seeing me at the head of them, for they certainly would have done the same today had I not been present. About noon a chief of some consequence, attended by a great number of people, came down to the landing place. I presented him with such articles as I had with me, and in return he gave me some of his ornaments. After these mutual exchanges a good understanding seemed to be established between us, so that we got by exchanges as much fruit as loaded 2 boats, with which we returned on board to dinner, but could not prevail on the chief to accompany us. In the afternoon the watering and trading parties were sent on shore, though the latter got but little, as most of the natives had retired into the country. A party of us went to the other, or southern cove of the bay, where I procured 5 pigs, and came to the house which we were told did belong to the man we had killed. He must have been a person of some note, as there were 6 pigs in and about his house, which we were told belonged to his son, who fled on our approach. I wanted much to have seen him, to make him a present, and by other kind treatment to convince him and the others that it was not from any bad design against the nation that we had killed his father. It would have been to little purpose if I had left anything in the house, as it certainly would have been taken by others, especially as I could not sufficiently explain to them my meaning. Strict honesty was seldom observed when the property of our things came to be disputed. I saw a striking instance of this in the morning, when I was going ashore. A man in a canoe offered me a small pig for a 6-inch spike, and another man being employed to convey it, I gave him the spike, which he kept for himself, and instead of it, gave to the man who owned the pig a 6-penny nail. Words of course arose, and I waited to see how it would end, but as the man who had possession of the spike seemed resolved to keep it, I left them before it was decided. In the evening we returned on board with what refreshments we had collected, and thought we had made a good day's work. On the 10th, early in the morning, some people from more distant parts came in canoes alongside and sold us some pigs, so that we had now sufficient to give the crew a fresh meal. They were in general so small that 40 or 50 were hardly sufficient for this purpose. The trade on shore for fruit was as brisk as ever. After dinner I made a little expedition in my boat along the coast to the southward, accompanied by some of the gentlemen. At the different places we touched at we collected 18 pigs, and I believe might have got more. The people were exceedingly obliging wherever we landed, and readily brought down whatever we desired. The next morning I went down to the same place where we had been the preceding evening, but instead of getting pigs as I expected, found the scene quite changed. The nails and other things they were mad about but the evening before they now despised, and instead of them wanted they did not know what, so that I was obliged to return with 3 or 4 little pigs, which cost more than a dozen did the day before. When I got on board I found the same change had happened there, as also at the trading place on shore. The reason was, several of the young gentlemen having landed the preceding day, had given away in exchange various articles which the people had not seen before, and which took with them more than nails or more useful iron tools. But what ruined our market the most was one of them giving for a pig a very large quantity of red feathers he had got at Amsterdam. None of us knew at this time that this article was in such estimation here, and if I had known it, I could not have supported the trade, in the manner it was begun, one day. Thus was our fine prospect of getting a plentiful supply of refreshments from these people frustrated, which will ever be the case so long as every one is allowed to make exchanges for what he pleases, and in what manner he pleases. When I found this island was not likely to supply us on any conditions with sufficient refreshments, such as we might expect to find at the Society Isles, nor very convenient for taking in wood and water, nor for giving the ship the necessary repairs she wanted, I resolved forthwith to leave it, and proceed to some other place where our wants might be effectually relieved. For after having been 19 weeks at sea, and living all the time upon salt diet, we could not but grant some refreshments, although I must own, and that with pleasure, that on our arrival here, it could hardly be said we had one sick man, and but a few who had the least complaint. This was undoubtedly owing to the many antiscorbutic articles we had on board, and to the great attention of the surgeon, who was remarkably careful to apply them in time. End of Book 2, Chapter 9. Recording by David Cole, Medway, Massachusetts.